A tragic attack outside a Detroit strip mall leaves a community grasping for answers.
He came up behind them and ordered them both to the vehicle.
He was pistol whipped.
She was begging for her life, saying, please don't kill me, I'll do anything you want.
For almost 2 decades, the identity of this assailant would remain a mystery, while a life of power and privilege rose from the ashes of the tragedy.
What you had in the Detroit region was the ultimate power couple.
They were living the lifestyle of the rich and famous.
But underneath this polished veneer, a scandal was brewing, one fueled by greed and born of blood.
He had talked to his uncle a lot about wanting to kill people, wanting to do a lot of crazy things.
Everybody thinks we're really ironclad.
So the question becomes, after 20 years, why would these two come forward?
If they can't get you one way, they're gonna come after another. Ask him, does he love me?
January 8th, 1982. The evening sun is setting in the upscale Detroit enclave of Southfield. Inside a Chinese restaurant at a local strip mall, a smattering of residents are enjoying dinner after a long work week. But what should be a relaxing Friday night is about to become a nightmare.
At approximately 8:30 p.m., a man staggered into the restaurant screaming.
Oh, God. Oh, God. Help. Please help. Oh, my God. Please, I've been attacked.
And he tells them, my wife's been shot. I've just been robbed. He's been hit over the back of the head. It's at that point that workers in the restaurant, they call the authorities.
The patrons inside the restaurant call 911 and tend to the injured man. Moments later, first responders roll up on a Cadillac parked behind the building and make a horrifying discovery.
They see a young woman in the backseat of the car suffering from a gunshot wound to the head and to her face.
She was basically barely alive at the time.
After EMS arrives, they take her to the closest hospital, which is Providence Hospital in Southfield. He's also taken to Providence Hospital because of his injuries as well.
Back at the restaurant, shell-shocked patrons identify the couple to police.
It's not the first time they'd ever been to eat there. They were customers there before it.
Have you ever seen this person before?
Yeah, they're Thomas and Sharon Randolph.
Although the injured couple has been identified, the mystery around the incident is just beginning. Detectives are about to embark on a 19-year quest for truth, one with more plot twists than a Hitchcock film and more scandals than the most salacious soap opera, one that stars Thomas and Sharon Randolph.
It's just absolutely unbelievable, absolutely amazing how it all came together. All right.
Born in 1942 to a poor family in New York City, Thomas Randolph was a child of the streets.
Thomas Randolph grew up in Harlem. He was a juvenile delinquent, he was a high school dropout, and he had even done a period of time of incarceration in New York.
But the time he spent in juvenile detention had a profound impact on young Thomas, and as a teenager, he turned his life around.
He eventually went on to obtain his GED. He enlisted in the Army. He served his country in Vietnam.
Following his tour overseas, Thomas earned a scholarship and later a degree from Western Michigan University.
He was a smart guy. He went to school, but he wasn't just smart, he was very athletic. In fact, he ran track.
He honed in on his talents in being a track star and even rose to the level as to being an alternate on a 1968 Olympic track team. So this is a person who has a lot of talent. This is a person who has a lot of strength. This is a person who is very intelligent to have done the things that he's done.
He had pulled himself up by his bootstraps and he achieved success.
The sky seemed to be the limit for Thomas, but when it came to love, he endured more than his fair share of heartache.
Thomas married twice, both ended quickly in divorce. The only silver lining was that the relationships produced 2 sons that he dearly loved.
After 2 failed marriages, this 33-year-old single father was hardly looking for another long-term relationship. But sometimes when you least expect it, love finds you.
Mr. Randolph is there at a restaurant, and in walks Sharon.
I have 2 of those.
When they first met, it was love at first sight.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good.
Sharon Beatty was 12 years Thomas's junior and a patrol officer with the Detroit Police Department. She had good looks and a sexy swagger that immediately caught Thomas's eye.
So, I don't mean to be too forward, but are you doing anything this weekend? I would love to take you out, get to know you a little better.
I would love that.
Yeah?
Yeah, let me give you my number.
Thomas and Sharon found themselves very much attracted to each other. It was just a perfect match.
Oh, God. How'd I get so lucky?
They started dating, and their physical connection was intense. It was a passionate relationship.
But Sharon and Thomas shared much more than just sexual chemistry.
Both had a rough past, but they managed to pick themselves up and overcome huge obstacles.
Sharon had children from previous relationship. Thomas also had children from prior relationships.
They're both doing positive things. They're both working towards goals, and there lies the promise of being able to build something together.
In 1979, Sharon and Thomas tied the knot.
It was just ultimately what people viewed as the perfect relationship.
They were a very attractive couple and seemed to be very much in love with one another.
He went on to get his graduate degree. By the 1980s, he was working with Wayne County Community College as a professor, which can't be discounted. At that time, you didn't have a lot of African-American professors or teachers, but he was there helping young people out.
As husband and wife, the Randolphs made an impressive team, even after department budget cuts forced Sharon out as a Detroit police officer.
She was working security at the time. Most of the people that described her as a nice, beautiful woman, and somebody who was gregarious and always very friendly, and somebody that generally was a well-liked and loved person.
They really had it all together.
But on a cold winter night in 1982, fate dealt Thomas and Sharon a deadly blow.
Their dinner date turned into a nightmare after someone attacked them outside of a Chinese restaurant in Southfield, Michigan.
Now, inside a local emergency room, doctors are fighting to save Sharon's life, while her injured husband struggles to maintain his composure.
She was shot 2 times. Thomas, on the other hand, they took him in. He had injuries to his head. He was hit over the head.
Thomas could barely contain his emotions. He was so distraught. Was she okay? Was she gonna survive?
Oh, Doc. Doc, please tell me you have good news.
I'm so sorry. She did not make it.
She had suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head that really she could not survive.
Sharon was pronounced dead approximately an hour after the incident occurred.
Sharon, no. Oh, God.
Although Thomas appears truly devastated as both a victim and eyewitness to this deadly attack, he may hold the key to unlocking the case. But when this grieving husband finally reveals what happened, it will set off alarm bells all across suburban Detroit.
You cannot believe that all of this occurred.
People were appalled. People were looking for answers.
The lives of Detroit couple Thomas and Sharon Randolph have taken a shocking turn after they're violently attacked outside an area restaurant.
She had been shot and was pronounced dead after about an hour.
Thomas was brutally beaten on the head, but survived.
No one seems more devastated by Sharon's death than Thomas. Although he's still recovering from a head injury sustained in the attack, Thomas is eager to tell police what he knows.
Mr. Randolph, could you please tell us what happened?
My wife and I, we had just got done eating at the restaurant. We were going back to our car. It was probably 8 o'clock or so.
They were parked in the rear of the restaurant, and it was in a secluded area.
There's 2 entrances into the mall. There's an east and a west side entrance. Thomas had told the officers that he parked behind the strip mall and used that east entrance, and they were immediately approached by an individual that he never saw.
Get in the car.
Hey.
Get in the car!
All right, hey.
Get in the car! Shut up.
That person forced him into the car at gunpoint and told him not to turn around, or he was going to get shot. And then that person got into the backseat of the Cadillac and pulled Sharon in.
This person demanded his money and his wallet from him of $310.
Money, now.
After getting those items, this person began to beat Mr. Randolph, essentially pistol whipping him.
he was struck in the back of the head and lost consciousness, or was semi-conscious, and during that time heard what he believed were firecrackers sounding.
Ultimately, he wakes up, he sees, oh my God, my wife's been shot. He runs back into the restaurant for help.
Detectives press Thomas for any information that could help them ID the suspect.
I didn't get a good look, but I could tell by the way he grabbed me, he was as tall as me, maybe a little taller, and he spoke with an accent.
What kind of accent?
Middle Eastern accent, maybe.
He described the accent as what he believed to be Middle Eastern.
Did you get a chance to identify him?
No, it just happened so fast.
Okay.
While police begin compiling a list of possible perps, detectives head to the scene of the shooting, where CSIs are already hard at work.
That's what we got.
At the side of Randolph's Cadillac, police locate what seems to be evidence.
There were items that appeared to have been Mrs. Randolph's.
They saw specific blood spatter marks on the rear driver door. There was a pool of blood in the rear driver's side of the vehicle.
But other than the blood and a few personal items, detectives don't have much to go on.
They were met with no physical evidence other than blood spatter.
Because the restaurant parking lot was in a relatively isolated area from the rest of the strip mall, there weren't any eyewitnesses to the crime.
With the identity of Thomas and Sharon's attacker still a mystery, investigators check up on the status of their team's perp search.
Did you guys do a records check?
It's a typical way that you would investigate crimes is to see if anybody's been recently released on parole that was in prison for robbery or murder.
Yeah, they've checked through all the city records. No one releasing us to fit the description.
At that time, they did pursue several leads to other crimes that occurred in other cities that described a suspect that was not a 100% fit, but the person could have been Middle Eastern.
Detroit has a sizable Middle Eastern population, so this really doesn't narrow down the list of possible suspects. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack.
But as investigators try to figure out what to do with this information, they can't shake one nagging detail about the crime.
Doesn't sound like a robbery to me.
When an armed robbery typically occurs, then the person is only interested in what they can get from you, that being money and or property.
You might hit them with a weapon, but you usually don't take the time to shoot a second party.
You have a man and a woman, a husband and a wife that are together. You have pretty much disabled the man by beating him to the point of unconsciousness. He's no longer a threat. So why is she shot? So why is it that Sharon Randolph had to die? Why did she pose a threat to the would-be robber?
It's that line of questioning that's about to turn up a shocking new lead and a surprising motive behind the murder.
This is literally made for TV information.
Tell him I'm committed to him forever.
The January 1982 murder of former Detroit police officer Sharon Randolph has investigators in nearby Southfield on the hunt for a killer.
Mr. Randolph alleged that there was a robbery that took place and he was pistol whipped and his wife had been shot.
As he was falling out of consciousness, he heard someone with an accent, and he indicated that it was a Middle Eastern accent.
The Middle Eastern population in Detroit is pretty large, so this doesn't narrow it down very much. But since Sharon was a former police officer, and once an officer, always an officer, authorities were that much more determined to find Sharon's killer.
Detectives start by interviewing Sharon's friends and former colleagues, hoping to hone in on a possible suspect. Instead, this canvassing effort turns up some surprising and far more personal information.
This wasn't the perfect marriage. There were problems.
Sharon Randolph had been involved in an extramarital affair with a co-worker, a police officer.
Once it was discovered that Sharon Randolph had been involved in an adulterous relationship, that kind of shed new light onto the investigation. It shifted from a classic armed robbery gone wrong to possibly this could have been an act of violence by a jealous lover.
Maybe what Thomas Randolph thought was a robbery gone wrong was just staged to look that way. Maybe Sharon's lover was trying to tell her that if he couldn't have her all to himself, then no one could have her.
Do you guys know who she was having an affair with?
Sharon's former colleagues identified Michael Radford as the man that she was having an affair with. He was still on the force, so the police went to the precinct where he was stationed and questioned him.
This was a very uncomfortable situation. Law enforcement officers having to question one of their own about another officer's murder. But it had to be done.
Through our investigation, we did find out that you and Sharon Randolph were having an affair.
That's true. I was seeing Sharon. I don't deny that at all.
According to Michael, the affair began 3 to 4 years prior when he and Sharon were working for the same police precinct.
Apparently, Sharon and Michael's sexual chemistry was explosive. They would have these passionate sexual rendezvous at Michael's apartment, and then Sharon would go back home to her husband.
In fact, Michael alleged Sharon only married Thomas because Sharon couldn't get Michael to commit completely to her. So it seems all along, Sharon's heart may have belonged to another man.
And can you tell me, when was the last time you two saw each other?
Saw Sharon 2 days ago.
2 days ago?
Yeah.
And you didn't mind that she was still with her husband?
Wait a minute. You don't think I had anything to do with this?
Mr. Radford, I'm just asking the questions.
You can check my alibi.
What they learned was that, well, in fact, he was on another side of the city working. There was no way possible he committed this murder.
But before detectives end their interview, Michael Radford suggests they might want to look into another man with reason to murder Sharon.
Might want to look into Thomas.
According to Michael, less than a year prior to Sharon's murder, Thomas discovered what his wife had been doing behind closed doors.
Thomas Randolph discovered that his wife was having an affair.
He didn't handle it well.
Michael said Thomas called him up. He was furious and ordered him to stay away from his wife.
This new information forces investigators to consider whether Thomas Randolph might have played a hand in his wife's killing.
In light of Michael Radford's allegations, detectives decide to bring Thomas in for another round of questioning.
How would anybody feel if their wife was having an affair? I was angry, but we were really working to try to make things right.
Detectives aren't 100% sure they buy Thomas Randolph's story, so they do more digging. And what they discover raises eyebrows.
Thomas took out insurance policies on his wife just 3 or 4 months prior to the murder.
While the timing is certainly suspicious, a closer examination of the insurance policies reveals there's more to the story.
It wasn't just Thomas taking out policies on Sharon. Sharon also took policies out on Thomas as well. It seemed to be a decision they both made.
Post-murder, it then looks suspicious, but before she was murdered, the fact that they both took out insurance policies on each other would indicate nothing more than that they wanted to make sure that the survivor was covered if something should happen to one or the other of them.
To police, this insurance angle just doesn't seem like the proper motive.
On top of that, there is zero physical or circumstantial evidence linking Thomas Randolph to his wife's murder.
There were no surveillance cameras, there were no cell phones, there were no text messages, there was no email. A lot of the things that we rely on now.
They didn't have a lot to go on.
There's also the fact that Thomas himself was attacked. Who hits himself on the head that viciously? So it wasn't really adding up that Thomas could have been involved with his wife's murder.
Having all but ruled out Thomas as a suspect, detectives turn their attention back to tracking down the unknown Middle Eastern man he identified as the assailant.
The police were able to track down and talk to a number of men of Middle Eastern descent who could have hypothetically been connected to the crime, but no one fit the bill.
Either the men turned out not to have discernible accents, were the wrong height, or had strong alibis.
Detectives were frustrated and family and friends were disappointed, but there was really nothing anyone could do.
There were no other leads for the investigators to follow. This case went cold.
As for Thomas Randolph, his love for Sharon seems to bear out. In the months that follow, he does his best to pick up the pieces of his life and tackles the role of raising his and Sharon's children by himself. That October, Thomas wins a custody battle against the father of Sharon's 2 surviving children.
He was able to gain custody of those 2 children over the biological fathers.
The courts thought he would be the best for the children.
He was really being a decent guy and he wanted to take care of the kids.
Thomas's decision to take care of his deceased wife's children looks like the act of a loving man. But later that year, another development leaves Sharon's closest friends and family stunned.
His wife is murdered in January 1982, but Thomas was remarried about 10 months later when he married Marie Jackson Randolph.
They were shocked that he remarried so quickly.
However, to Thomas's work colleagues, his union with Marie makes sense.
They ran in similar circles. They both worked at Wayne County Community College where they initially met.
She could talk to Thomas about his loss because she herself lost her children in a house fire and could share in tragedy.
In November of 1983, roughly a year after Thomas and Marie's wedding, Thomas's insurance company makes good on Sharon's life insurance policy.
He was successful in receiving over $200,000.
From then on, Thomas and Marie focus on building a new life together, and what an extraordinary one it is.
After getting his insurance proceeds, he invests in Marie's business.
Marie opened the first 24-hour daycare anywhere in the United States.
Ultimately, her business grows from just a handful of employees to well over 500 employees that she employed citywide.
He eventually became an attorney in the state of Michigan and obtained a PhD. They had a residence in the prominent Palmer Woods neighborhood of the city of Detroit, which has very lavish homes. Some of the homes there are extremely large. It's a place that you want to live when you're a successful person. They drove expensive, flashy vehicles.
Thomas had an affinity towards Rolls Royces. And Marie, on the other hand, she loved her fur coats.
It was rumored that she had a whole room in her house that was outfitted just to have climate and control and the proper humidity to store the many, many fur coats that she had.
Very successful power couple.
Driving around in Rolls Royces, over 200 fur coats, taking trips to the Caribbean, paying for employees to go on these lavish trips, family to go on these lavish trips. They were living the lifestyle of the rich and famous.
In the upper echelons of Detroit society of the time, no one was more admired than the Randolphs.
Marie received an award by a major cosmetic company for being a Woman of the Year for her work in providing daycare facilities for women, which gave them greater opportunity to advance in their careers.
Thomas Randolph was this wonderful attorney who was working at a community college helping kids.
They were two people that were considered to have raised themselves from lower middle class families and beat the odds.
But in 1999, nearly 2 decades after the tragic death of Sharon, a scandal would erupt that would engulf the Randolphs, triggering a fall from grace of epic proportions.
Your typical Greek tragedy. Family comes crashing down.
Everything that Thomas Randolph has worked for years to attain is all about to explode right before his eyes.
Following the tragic slaying of his wife Sharon at the hands of an unknown assailant in 1982, Thomas Randolph managed to rebuild his life, remarrying an entrepreneur named Marie Jackson. Together, Thomas and Marie have climbed the highest rungs of the Detroit social ladder, attaining a level of wealth, power, and privilege that few could imagine.
They have this lavish lifestyle, movie stars would envy.
They lived in a very affluent neighborhood in Detroit. So this is the Palmer Woods area in a mansion that's almost 5,000 square feet.
They were a power couple. They were movers and shakers in Detroit.
But in the summer of 1999, Thomas and Marie's storybook life together begins to crumble.
Turns out Marie Jackson Randolph wasn't quite the loving employer that she was purported to be. There were some employees that didn't like the way that she treated them, and they turned on her in a major way.
Disgruntled employees reported Marie Jackson Randolph to the IRS, and there was an investigation.
She was accused of fraudulently taking money from the U.S. government for meals to her daycare center that weren't being provided.
She faces 63 counts of fraud, conspiracy by the federal government.
And although Thomas is never implicated in his wife's crimes, following Marie's trial, the couple's once glamorous life lies in ruins.
Marie is found guilty. She's fined $1.1 million. She has to pay restitution for $13 million. But the worst part is she has to serve 9 years in prison. So in 1999, Marie is off to prison and Thomas is alone again.
What a terrible thing for this poor guy. His first wife's murdered, and his second wife is out doing these crazy things.
But the unraveling of Thomas and Marie's dream life is just beginning.
At the same time, a cold case unit with the Oakland County Sheriff's Office coincidentally reopens the Sharon Randolph murder file.
They had opened a new cold case department and assigned a new detective to the case. His name was Tom Litoraki.
I was assigned to investigate cold cases that were in need of updating to current standards. Law enforcement's always changing. Technology's always changing. Those things need to be brought up as they change, or new techniques become available to deal with evidence that couldn't be processed when a crime had occurred many years ago. And people's attitudes change, and people change, and information that they may want to share now that they didn't want to share. So all those things need to be looked at again.
It takes a very unusual police officer to work cold cases because you're plowing through things that have already been said and you're looking at them differently. And not only that, you're looking at things that other police officers may have overlooked. Tom is very intelligent, he's very smart, works at a very high RPM, and has so much pride in his work. That's one of the reasons he was assigned to this unit. He believes in what he's doing.
I got to the point where myself and the team that I was working with at the time chased every possible scenario, every possible lead, every possible person that could have had any information about what happened.
But the problem is people move, they die, they disappear, and leads go cold.
Just when it seems Litoraki's work on the Sharon Randolph case will be for naught, his investigation takes a surprising turn.
2 witnesses stepped forward.
They actually made a phone call to the Detroit Police Department, where they were living at the time, and said, we have information about a murder that occurred.
The Randolph case?
David Hutzel and Sarah Norwood revealed that their uncle, Sanarel Shannon, had actually pulled the trigger that killed Sharon Randolph.
Oh yeah, send him down, I'll talk to him.
This is completely new information to Litoraki and his team. The name Sanarel Shannon had never even come up in the first investigation, and this could be the lead that breaks this case wide open.
On December 2nd, 1999, David Hutzel and Sarah Norwood come down to the station for an interview. Detective Litoraki's first question for them is an obvious one.
After 20 years, why would these two come forward?
He had to be very suspicious about their motives.
According to David and Sarah, an overwhelming fear of their uncle Sanarel Shannon had left them paralyzed for years.
David and Sarah describe him as having some type of mental disorder or mental issue that went untreated throughout his whole life.
They all lived together, which to call that home dysfunctional would be a horrible understatement.
They described to me that he always displayed bizarre behavior and that he's always been very violent, has been violent with his parents and threatened neighbors, other members of his family, just out of the blue.
He talked a lot about wanting to kill people, wanting to do a lot of crazy things. It was a place that was ruled by Sanarel Shannon's violence and his threats. And he kept everybody in that house right under his control. Nobody made a move in that house without him. Nobody did anything without his permission. I mean, that was genuine fear that the people in that home had with him.
You came forward because you're not afraid anymore?
No, that's not it at all.
It was my idea to come forward.
The niece, Sarah Norwood, she says, I learned recently that I had cancer, and the doctors tell me I have 6 to 8 months to live. I've been living with this guilt for almost 20 years. I can't bear it anymore.
But to fully come clean, Sarah and David will have to reveal another closely guarded secret.
They alleged that Sanarel Shannon conspired with someone else to commit the murder of Sharon Randolph.
Not only did they conspire to kill her, they actually carried it out.
For 18 long years, the shooting death of 26-year-old Sharon Randolph has remained unsolved. But now, in December of 1999, 2 longtime residents of Detroit have come forward with information that could light a fire under this cold case.
David Hutzel and Sarah Norwood came to the police and revealed that their uncle, Sanarel Shannon, had been involved in this horrific crime.
David told me the night that Sharon was murdered, Sanarel asked David to drive him to the Harvard Road Shopping Mall in Southfield. Sanarel instructed him to park behind the building.
Wait here, don't go anywhere, don't do anything. And his uncle jumped out.
David didn't question Sanarel because he knew throughout his life what happens when you question Sanarel. Sanarel becomes violent. You don't question Sanarel when he tells you to do something. You just do it. David had learned this.
David says a short while later, he saw an African-American woman exit the mall, accompanied by a man David immediately recognized.
That was Thomas Randolph. He's a professor at the school that my uncle went to.
David described to me that Sanarel idolized Thomas and his stature in the community and wanted to be more than a student to Thomas, and eventually became somewhat of a mentor relationship.
Which, according to David, made what his uncle did next all the more shocking.
He sees his uncle pull a gun and rush towards Thomas Randolph and the woman beside him as they were about to get into their car.
He came up behind them and ordered them both to the vehicle.
Hey, get in the car! All right. Sharon Randolph was begging for her life at the time, saying, please don't kill me, I'll do anything you want.
He proceeded to shoot Sharon Randolph in the temple once.
David said he was yelling, "Die, bitch, die."
And then he shot her again. Through the chin, and it went through the top of her head.
But what David claims happened next is even more chilling.
David overheard Thomas instructing Sanarel to make this look good and to hit him so that he would have some type of injury to make the robbery more believable.
Hit me in the head, man. Hit me in the head, man.
That's when Sanarel hit him over the head with the gun. Tried to create some kind of bruise on his head.
It's clear that it was a staged robbery and that he was trying to cover up his involvement.
David says at that point, Thomas Randolph limped off toward the restaurant to establish his alibi, while his uncle Sanarel jumped back in their car.
What the hell was that?
David said that his uncle put the gun to his head and said, get out of here, and don't burn any rubber or I'll blow your head off.
Hey, slow.
He was so nervous that he did screech the wheels a little bit. His uncle told him, don't do that again or you'll be done.
When Sarah Norwood is questioned, her story picks up where David Hutzel's left off.
Sarah was not present for the murder, but was present at the home. When they returned, Sarah described that Sanarel had an extreme adrenaline rush going on. He was very animated, yelling about what they had just done.
Oh my God, did you see that? Did you see that?
What happened?
Hush.
He had blood on his chest, and he disposed of his clothing in a garbage bag.
Subsequent to that, she also observed him allegedly throw the gun in the Detroit River that was supposedly used to kill Mrs. Randolph.
Why do you think that your uncle would have committed this crime?
Mr. Randolph hired him to do it.
She overheard conversations where her uncle was demanding money and that Thomas Randolph was indicating that he was waiting on insurance proceeds to be paid. Following this incident, Thomas Randolph brought money to her uncle in a briefcase. It was approximately $40,000.
But this was apparently no one-time payout. According to Sarah, Thomas Randolph remained in close contact with her uncle over the next several years.
Randolph was going and giving him money, you know, basically to keep quiet. He was always worried Sanarel Shannon was going to say something.
And Thomas allegedly continued paying that hush money until his wife Marie was arrested in 1999.
Sanarel was essentially homeless, living in a neighbor's garage and constantly asking Thomas for money, who is now in financial peril because his wife has been arrested for defrauding the government. Thomas couldn't handle it, so he went and bought him a one-way bus ticket to Hattiesburg, Mississippi.
Although David and Sarah's story sounds credible, Detective Litoraki needs to be sure they're telling the truth.
I arranged for a polygraph for David on the information that he provided about the murder of Sharon, and David passed that polygraph without any problem at all.
The drawback is you can't use that in a court of law, but it can give you what? Probable cause to start putting the pieces together based upon what this person said.
Also, investigators found a former landlord of Sanarel Shannon's who claims to have witnessed Thomas Randolph visiting Shannon many times and giving him the ticket to Mississippi.
Even though David and Sarah seem to be telling the truth, investigators still can't figure out Thomas Randolph's motive. After all, both Thomas and Sharon had taken out life insurance policies on each other shortly after they married.
So they dig into Randolph's past, and a review of his financial situation in 1982 suggests a possible motive for murder.
He was broke. His credit cards were maxed out. His wife had been laid off from her job. They had a bunch of kids. He wasn't managing it financially well. Then he took out several life insurance policies.
And what he did to Sharon's kids the year after he received the $200,000 payout emphasized just how far he was willing to go to strike it rich.
When he gets the money, all of a sudden, he relinquishes custody without any explanation, just gives them away.
For Detective Litoraki, it's enough evidence to seek arrest warrants against Thomas Randolph and Sanarel Shannon.
So I put together a plan that involved an arrest of both subjects on the same day at the same time, so that one person couldn't get to the other person and tell them, hey, I just been arrested.
On July 20th, 2000, Detective Litoraki flies to Mississippi to apprehend Sanarel Shannon.
Sanarel Shannon.
Yeah.
You are under arrest for the murder of Sharon Randolph.
He was working as a painter on a paint crew, and he was at a office building that they were building in the area down there in Hattiesburg painting. And me and my team went to him and arrested him.
Simultaneously, officers pay Thomas Randolph a visit at his prestigious Detroit law office.
I'd like to ask you if you recognize anybody in any of these pictures.
We made a fake appointment saying that we needed some legal advice and told him we're looking into an old case. The investigator was able to show Thomas Randolph a photographic lineup that contains a photograph of Sanarel from 1981. The investigator said that somebody knew the person that shot your wife, and his picture's in these pictures.
No, I don't know those guys. And I actually have a meeting that I need to get to, so if you all just
You
excuse
won't
me.
be going anywhere, sir. You're under arrest.
I felt like a proud papa. I just smiled and said, another one bites the dust.
That day, Detective Litoraki attempts to question Sanarel at the Hattiesburg Police Department.
Sanarel told me he'd write a statement, and I gave him a piece of paper, and he started to write a few words on a piece of paper, and then he crumbled it up and threw it away.
But Sanarel Shannon does give Detective Litoraki permission to search his room. There, he uncovers more concrete proof of the long-standing relationship between Shannon and Randolph.
I found several letters addressed to Sanarel from Thomas Randolph that had been mailed to him at this boarding house recently, within the year, that contained money orders. Thomas Randolph, in his own pen, was addressing envelopes, getting money orders, and still sending money to Sanarel in Hattiesburg, Mississippi.
News of Thomas Randolph's arrest spreads like wildfire across Detroit.
His wife was convicted of fraud, and now this? To everyone, it was shocking to even believe that this prominent figure and philanthropist could be involved in a murder-for-hire plot.
But the people of Detroit haven't seen anything yet, because when it goes to trial, this 20-year-old case will set the city ablaze and reveal another tawdry layer to this already bizarre story.
This call is from a federal crazy, so everybody thinks we're really ironclad. Ask him, does he love me?
For prominent Detroit couple Thomas and Marie Randolph, their fall from wealth and power has been stunning indeed.
Marie is serving a 9-year sentence for fraud, while her husband Thomas is now implicated in a murder-for-hire plot in the death of his previous wife, Sharon.
Thomas and his former student, Sanarel Shannon, were alleged to have orchestrated and carried out the 1982 murder of Thomas's third wife, Sharon.
The arrest of one of the city's most prominent citizens is front-page news.
The media reported on their problems, their issues.
The media was portraying Thomas and Marie to be these criminals with this vast illicit empire.
Ironically, in the wake of his arrest, they talked by phone from prison and jail with Thomas's son as their mediator. Their bond seems to be strengthened by their legal problems.
They all painted us out to be a black Bonnie and Clyde. It's terrible, but we'll live through it. We'll live through it.
At this point, Thomas and Marie have been accused of terrible things, but through it all, they continue to support each other.
Tell him I love and worship him.
On October 8, 2001, Thomas Randolph and his alleged hitman and co-conspirator Sanarel Shannon are led into a Michigan courtroom.
Both defendants were going to stand trial together, but their cases were going to be considered by two separate juries.
It just seemed very strange. It's two people that would not normally be friends. Mr. Shannon, he looked I don't know how to say it. I wouldn't want to meet him. He was kind of scary, whereas Mr. Randolph looked very well put together. There was never anything askew. He was always pressed. He did look like one of the attorneys.
In their opening statements, prosecutors lay out Thomas's motive for orchestrating the murder of his then-wife, Sharon Randolph.
Thomas Randolph was in financial dire straits in 1982. He needed cash. He knew that there was an insurance policy on his wife. Not to mention, he knew that she was having an affair. So prosecutors say that Thomas had his wife killed in a fake robbery in order to cash in on that policy.
I think he made almost an actuarial decision that it would be better to kill her and go on himself without her rather than get a divorce.
The prosecution's case turns heavily on the testimony of the state's two-star witnesses, Sanarel Shannon's niece and nephew, David Hutzel, and Sarah Norwood.
David Hutzel takes the stand and claims that he witnessed the murder. He said he saw his uncle shoot Sharon in the head while she fled for her life, and then he hit Thomas over the head with his pistol to make it look like a robbery.
The silence in the courtroom when that was going on was deafening. It was that damning, that intense.
When Sarah took the stand, she testified about seeing her uncle come home that night with blood on his clothes and how he got rid of those clothes along with the murder weapon. She later testified that she also saw Thomas Randolph giving her uncle a bag of money.
But when it's the defense's turn to cross-examine, they begin poking holes in Sarah and David's seemingly airtight testimony.
The defense pointed out that David Hutzel gave conflicting statements about whether or not he assisted his uncle in disposing of the clothing, and he gave conflicting information with respect to the timeline of the term of events.
And perhaps the most controversial claim by defense attorneys is the suggestion that Sarah Norwood's cancer battle may not have been the catalyst that prompted her and David to come forward to authorities after nearly 2 decades of silence.
They may have had a bone to pick with their uncle.
Sarah Norwood, she was involved in an estate, a probate matter against her uncle. They allege that none of this occurred, that her sole motive was to get back at Mr. Shannon.
Prosecutors counter by pointing out that the physical evidence supports David Hutzel's version of events, not Thomas Randolph's.
Thomas Randolph's account of the events on the day in question was that Sharon was shot from inside the car. However, David testified that he saw Sharon being shot from outside the car with the back door open. Roger Fleming, the CSI tech who collected the blood splatter evidence, stated that the evidence corroborated David's version and not Thomas's.
He talked about that high-impact spanner on the door, that if it had occurred as they were saying and she were in the back seat of the car when she had gotten shot, then you wouldn't have seen any of that blood spatter on the door because her body would have blocked all that. And the significance of that was that's exactly how David Hutzel described the shooting as taking place.
After nearly 7 weeks of grueling testimony, the 2 juries adjourned for deliberation.
No one was sure which way it would go. A lot of it turned on whether people believed David Hutzel and Sarah Norwood were telling the truth.
3 days later, on November 27, 2001, both panels returned with a verdict.
Thomas Randolph was found guilty of first-degree premeditated murder, but the jury for Sanarel Shannon found him not guilty on first-degree premeditated murder. Many people were confused by the fact that the mastermind of this particular murder, Thomas Randolph, was convicted, but that the alleged triggerman was acquitted.
I still don't know how they found him innocent. It was very confusing.
When I spoke to Sanarel Shannon's juries, they said, yeah, we thought he did it, but we just thought kind of with the age and the time, we weren't sure beyond a reasonable doubt. So that's why we acquitted him.
We have a legal system that many believe is the best in the world, but it isn't without flaws. There were 2 defendants, 2 juries, and the same set of facts, yet there were 2 different verdicts. Sharon and Thomas's families were distraught and confused as to how the juries could convict one without the other.
The judge sentences Thomas Randolph to life in prison. For those in attendance, it's a bittersweet victory.
When I look back on all these facts, that's what kind of sticks out the most. When you put all those puzzle pieces together, this was a well-thought-out, laid-out plan by Thomas Randolph to have his wife killed, and he got away with it for almost 20 years.
Thomas and Sharon were an up-and-coming couple who had their fair share of struggles, but Thomas wanted money, Thomas wanted power, Thomas wanted it all.
Thomas Randolph's greed for money and power drove him to act in the most heinous and unimaginable way, much like his 4th wife. In the end, their deception landed them in the same place.
This was someone who was highly successful, highly regarded in the community. You know, the community had a tough time putting their hands around this case, but for the family of Sharon Randolph, it was the ultimate closure. They saw that Thomas Randolph was in prison behind bars, never to get out again.